From awaytogarden.com and robinhoodradio.com, this is A Way to Garden with Margaret Roach, your weekly invitation to dig in and grow.
A note from a listener addressed to me and my urgent garden question answering sidekick, Ken Druse, asked our advice for planning a garden from the very beginning while his home construction is underway. Well, when Ken and I began discussing possible answers, the subject quickly mutated to garden planning in general and the things we wish we'd included in our places right from the start, and that every gardener should make room for whatever stage his or her garden is at. More on that in a moment, but first these messages.
Underwriting support from Timber Press, your go-to resource for books in gardening and nature. Whether you're a new gardener, a professional at the top of your field, or a reader interested in the wonders of the natural world, their books are there to help you grow. TimberPress.com. Underwriting support from High Mowing Organic Seeds, the first independently owned farm-based seed company proudly serving organic gardeners and farmers with 100% organic and non-GMO vegetable, herb, and flower seeds. HighMowingSeeds.com/awaytogarden.
Ken Druse, author of nearly 20 beautiful and inspirational garden books, including The New Shade Garden and Making More Plants, is back today to tackle garden design from the ground up, and which must-have elements even established gardens need to find room for. Ken, hello. How are you?
Oh, I'm excited, Margaret.
Oh, okay, good. Because of this question from Kyle that we got?
Well, this is like planting a seed. This question,
Uh-oh.
And now it's grown into an entire garden in my head. Starting with breaking ground for Kyle's house. It's very exciting.
All right. So what I'll do is to fill everybody in, our listener Kyle's question that sort of set us off ruminating about the essential elements of a garden. And ... It read like this. He said, I'm purchasing 8 wooded acres in upstate South Carolina, building a new home. Of course, I want a lot of landscaping and gardens, but I'm going to have to focus on getting the house built first. Because of that, I'm going to need to take a phased approach outside. Do you have recommendations on how to prioritize garden projects when starting with a blank canvas, and also where to budget versus where to splurge? I think that's the part of it that got me going, Ken.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I just want to say something about that, building the house.
Yes.
If I may. Just have a place to stage the materials, and don't let machinery near the base of any trees that you like. And there's never enough hose, faucets, and electric outlets. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, well,
outside.
And spoken
like
someone who's been through it. And so listeners may not know, Ken, that how many years ago you redid your house within a garden. So tell us just the brief version of that.
Well, the house was a mill store, I think, from about 1840, and the roof could not be repaired, and the house was falling down. So we tore down the house to the foundation and built a new house on the foundation and added not enough electric outlets, but yes, enough hose bibs. So I was concentrating on that. But and like Kyle, in a way, I'm close to the road and I've already got a garden. So tearing down the house couldn't have any machinery, just had to do it by hand. Well, I didn't do it, but it was done by hand. But it was an interesting case, and I learned a lot. I was going to say, if I knew now what I knew then, no other way around. Mm-hmm. But I didn't make too many mistakes, actually. But I just want to say electric outlets, hose bibs.
Do you want to say anything?
Keep the machinery away from trees.
Do you want to say anything about electric outlets or hose bibs?
It's on my mind for some reason.
Yes, I know, because we seem to forget. And look, even if someone has a very established garden like I do, every time I drag a 100-foot hose up the hill, I think to myself, Margaret, why in the world did you not run water up here? Do you know what I mean? So, I mean,
Yes.
And why aren't I doing it now? And why do I say it to myself every year instead of doing it? So some of this stuff with minimal disturbance we can retrofit, and we should retrofit to make the garden function better, right? And to be able to take better care of it.
That's a whole nother story, yes.
But seriously, so some of these tips are not just for for getting started. So you were saying things like when one is getting started, or someone might be building a garage, and that's going to cause disturbance in a part of the garden. It doesn't have to be a house from scratch. Not letting machinery near the base of trees is one of your top concerns, or was one of your top worries.
Yes. Well, I'm just saying that to everybody because I see it all the time. They put a fence 3 feet away from the base of a tree and park all the machinery under the tree. They don't want it to be in the sun.
Right. So other.
What's next?
Yeah. So getting started, again, when there's construction involved, there are these sort of defensive and strategic tactics we need to take. You said right at the start, you said a staging area. And by that you mean?
A place for the materials, just something to think about. But we can move on from that because there's so many things to think about with the garden and with the wooded site. And I'd say observe the site. And if you can do it for a season, that's great. Most people don't. I've seen people dig up really fantastic shrubs because they don't realize they're fantastic when they moved in November.
Right. So let's pretend then we're starting a garden, the construction aspect aside about a house. And It could be a new garden from scratch, or it could be a new bed or whatever. So let's talk about some of the planning tips that are irregardless of the construction or lack of construction. What do you think about first when you say, I'm making a new garden, or if you were helping someone do so?
I guess maybe make a list of the kinds of things you think you want. Maybe a dream list, because you might not be able to do everything. Have a fantastic outdoor grill with a complete outdoor kitchen and a fireplace. It may not happen, but make that list. Make that dream list. What do you think?
So sort of like, what do you want to do out there and when?
If you had a magic wand. Well, I wouldn't say when yet. Just, make that big list, and then you can start to edit it down to what's possible and ultimately where you're going to start. And as Kyle says, where to splurge.
I think about about even starting just a new bed, let alone a whole new garden, or when people ask me, who moved to my area and they're like, what should we do first? The first thing I always say, almost like, a reflex, is start small and start near the house. Again, this assumes, unlike Kyle, that there is a house, because I sort of went into that manifest destiny mode, 30-something years ago, and I was with sod strippers and, marking off with twine, and stakes. I was marking off areas to make beds all over the property. And, out of sight, out of mind, you do something that's too far away and you don't have to walk past it each day. And there's no incentive to go check on it each day or each week, and therefore weeds get going and you forget to water. You know what I mean? When you're beginning stuff, I think it's good to start small and start near where your most activity is till you get a sense of the bigger place. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about views from windows, maybe even to narrow it.
Super important. And that funny story, you probably remember the one about our friends Glenn and Charles from Seattle, Glenn Withy and Charles Price, and they had come to visit me, and I'm standing in the kitchen with one of them. We're cooking dinner after a day working in the garden together. And he says to me, we're looking out the window. There's 2 windows flanking the stove in my house. And what's there was my driveway right next to the window and my car. And he goes, do you really like the view of the side of your car doors? And literally, he's stirring a pot and he doesn't flinch. He doesn't miss a beat. It was so deadpan. And it shamed me so much that I learned that lesson. If you want to make a garden, go inside and look out the window and create axial views, right?
Yeah, well, we become house blind. We don't even notice the car doors. But it's a good tip. Think about the views from the windows, or the windows to be.
Did you, when you redid the house, were you kind of doing that in reverse? Were you thinking about where you would site things to be getting the best views? Or
That's interesting because the original building had windows on the road and stairs and no windows on the garden. So we just flipped it all around. We put the stairs on the road, and as you said, we put the windows strategically to have views, and even built a room with windows with views of the garden. So it's a reverse thing, but it certainly was a priority.
I think another thing is, who are you up against, right? I mean, like, I'm in an area where the herds of deer can be 40 animals. You don't kid around where I am with. It's a rural area. It's a state forest. So did you, when you started making your garden where you are, even before the house was redone, did you have a sense of the place in other ways, like things like deer?
Well, the house isn't on the garden, is an island in a river.
Oh, right. Okay.
And the original bridges when we moved here had open grates, and the deer wouldn't cross the grates. So that was great.
GREAT, not GRATE.
Right, right. And then they repaired the bridges and paved them. And it was open house. So we have deer fencing on almost all parts of the garden, except where the river is really fast and there's a wall and they can't get over it, except for once every other year when somebody gets in and something horrible happens. But in general, yes, deer fence went right to the top of the list.
Because I'm not a believer, and people take exception when I say this. I know I mention it in lectures and so forth. I'm not a believer that we can make gardens without protection against deer if we're in an area that has deer. I mean, I just can't. I couldn't fight them. You know what I mean? It wasn't possible. And I was tired of. It was one thing if they ate a hosta and it would, grow more leaves, but the woody plants were being disfigured, and that was years of time was lost, and some of them were so disfigured they couldn't be corrected. That was really harsh.
And you were talking about, I can't remember what you just said, but it made me think of screens. Maybe there's some things that you don't want to see out the window, like the neighbor's blue tarp on their boat or something, or the plastic children's play area.
So both look out the window in order to decide what to showcase and what pictures to paint where for your enjoyment, and also for what to erase. So that's another thing. So maybe that goes back to that list that you said at the beginning. You said the sort of what do you want to do out there? What do you want? Make that dream list. Maybe one of the dreams is I don't want to look at the blue tarp on the neighbor's boat. Do you know what I mean? And maybe that's one of them. So that's important. Other kind of other practical things that you wish you'd made room for right away that maybe you've added later? Or?
Well, when we first came here, the first thing we did in the sunniest part, and it's not very sunny here, was make a nursery bed.
Oh.
So we could buy plants for what we could afford, often small trees even, and plant them, and then figure out where we wanted them. And by the time we had figured some of that stuff out, we could shop in our own nursery bed because you could move almost anything. And the things were not tiny anymore. Things like roses had become, or climbing roses had become plants, and trees were flowering.
Right.
So I would start a nursery. Ours is long gone, that nursery bed, but I still have what I call splinter nurseries around the property where I have they're pretty. They're a couple of plants that I intend to use somewhere if I can figure it out, but I want to get some meat on them, especially when you buy a 7-inch tree, which we did a lot.
When we were young once, Ken. We bought 7-inch trees. We believed in things like that. Yeah. But you're absolutely right that, and this gets back to sort of Kyle's question about, that I loved the sort of punchline of his question was about what to budget on and where to splurge, what to budget and what to splurge on. So there's a big difference between a small woody plant especially, and then a landscape size, quote unquote, field dug, bull and burlap, whatever. It may be only a few years of difference in the thing's life, but the price difference is phenomenal. So you can have the very special things if maybe you grew them on yourself, you're saying, in this little nursery.
Well, but time is money, and there might be something you've dreamed about. Certainly for me there is, something I've always wanted to grow X, or this is going to be the big ticket item. Yeah, one special tree that's going to be a specimen. And even though people should have patience and don't ever think it's too late, but maybe you want to buy a 20-year-old tree.
And I did in the beginning splurge on a few things. I bought a copper beech tree, and not a giant one, obviously, because I guess you could get one moved in on a trailer truck or something if you were
helicopter
multi-millionaire. But this was, maybe it was, I don't know, 5 feet tall or something, but it was but it was expensive, right? It was expensive. It was a lot of, it was a little bit bushy and 5 feet tall. It was expensive. It was had a big, root ball and burlap and stuff, and we dragged it up to the top of the hill and planted it and so forth and I did that right at the beginning because I didn't know much, but I knew to look up which things grow fast and which grow slowly, and to put my dollars towards slightly bigger versions of the slow growers, because that cheated the time factor. I wasn't going to buy a big, huge willow, say, because those grow about 10 feet a minute. But I was willing to give that beech, which is relatively slower growing. It doesn't turn into a majestic creature. It doesn't even start making nuts until 30 years into its life. It doesn't reach mature. So that was worth it to get, say, 10 years head start, right? That was worth it. I wish I'd invested more in conifers earlier on instead of later.
So what do you do for conifers with the deer?
Well, I have a deer fence. I have an 8-foot fence around the whole place. So, yeah, because it would be hopeless otherwise. Yeah, definitely. Yep. I think one of the other things to think about, so we're looking out the windows and, we have our list of what we want and our wish list, but there are practicalities like we have to think about what are some of the obstacles. I think another one of the obstacles is just the sort of how the light moves in the place and the wind moves. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know how windy certain areas of my place were. I didn't know.
Well, as you're saying, where's the south? Where's the north? Where's the east and west? Of course, sounds simple and sounds obvious, but that might be the first thing to do. And
what are the prevailing winds in your area? Which, I didn't look that up. And then did you remember? Did you remember to plant big things on the right side of littler things so that you did or didn't shade? Do you know what I mean? Deprive one over the other. So to explain that, for instance.
Well, in that first nursery bed, the tallest plants, the trees, went on the north end of the bed. It was just a rectangular bed, probably 25 by 30 or 40 feet, and it was just with rows. And the trees went on the north so they wouldn't shade the other plants. But also, I don't think I had a shade nursery in the beginning, but later on I did. So maybe a nursery bed in the sun and another nursery bed in the shade. It sounds ridiculous, but it was wonderful. And then 3 or 4 years later, they were empty.
Well, and another thing you can do with it is when you have certain types of plants that self-sow and give you baby plants, but they do it often in the crack in the driveway or in between paving stones or places you don't want them. Rather than discarding them, you can accumulate them for use later when you start the next bed or whatever. So I like to do that as well. And frankly, I wasn't smart enough to make a separate bed, but I do use a bed in my raised bed vegetable garden is sort of my, quote, nursery. So, you can activate one of your vegetable garden beds for this purpose. Paths. How did you figure out? That's the other thing that's just really mystifying, especially if you have a blank canvas or if you're going to put a new garden, a garden sort of in a new area that isn't a natural, path from here to there. How do you figure that out?
Well, I was wondering if Kyle had a dog.
I don't know.
Because dogs make their own paths. And I always think, watch where the dogs walk and make those the paths, because they're going to walk that way whether you like it or not. And if you plan to have a bed, well, just put a simple utility path that the dog can walk through if you have a dog. And as you were saying these things, when we came here, we observed the whole place, which was all overgrown, but there were some special trees in kind of a circle. So the garden design was inspired by what was here, because things had been here a very long time.
Huh. So those you took as like the pillars of the place.
Right.
Huh.
And some of them are like 150 years old, but some of them have died in the last 25, 30 years. But that inspired it, and that ended up having sort of a round garden with mostly strangely old Japanese trees. I don't know who planted them. I couldn't find out. But there was a selection of some American, but mostly Japanese, big trees. And as I said, one is probably 140 years old, I would say.
I wish that I had buried some fencing right at the beginning, done some more trenching. Besides putting that water going up the hill, making a trench and doing that, I wish I had buried some fencing to thwart Mr. Woodchuck, for example.
You mean for the vegetable garden?
Yeah, I wish that had been one of the things that I did. Did you do any of that?
Well, I don't have enough sun for vegetables.
Uh-huh.
I do some vegetables, mostly fruits like tomatoes, on the driveway where it's sunniest in containers. So I've got a couple of berry things which aren't really bothered that much, but I can't grow that much food. But I always tell people to do that, to bury that.
Right.
And we certainly had woodchucks.
Yeah.
For many years. But I think that the dog again, the newer dog number 2, we don't seem to have woodchucks. And woodchucks are worse than deer, I would say.
They are pretty voracious. So in the last minute or so, Ken, are you doing any projects, additions, subtractions, changes, anything underway right now at your garden?
Well, it's been raining a lot this year.
Have you noticed? Yeah.
So I've been weeding. And then sometimes I weed, and occasionally I weed, and then I weed if it's not raining. And as I don't know if we've talked about it, but there's a new puppy, and that's like 24/7.
Yeah. So you've been babysitting, pet sitting.
I've been babysitting, pet sitting, and the puppy digs and the puppy eats plants.
Oh, all right.
So
that's
it's
keeping you
life-changing.
busy. That's keeping you busy. All right.
Very busy.
All right. Well, thank you, and it's always good to talk to you. Of course, I have to come visit.
We could talk forever.
I know, but I have to come. I have to come visit and see the garden this.
Oh wow!
This season.
Do it, please.
So maybe we'll swap visits. What do you think?
Excellent.
All right. So I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Underwriting support from Timber Press, your go-to resource for books in gardening and nature. Whether you're a new gardener, a professional at the top of your field, or a reader interested in the wonders of the natural world, their books are there to help you grow. TimberPress.com. Underwriting support from High Mowing Organic Seeds, the first independently owned farm-based seed company proudly serving organic gardeners and farmers with 100% organic and non-GMO vegetable, herb, and flower seeds. HighMowingSeeds.com/awaytogarden.
I hope I'll talk to all the rest of you soon again as well. Now, don't miss an episode. You can subscribe free to the podcast version on Stitcher or Spotify or iTunes. And you can find me anytime at awaytogarden.com or Facebook.com or Instagram as @awaytogarden. And happy gardening meantime.
Away to Garden with Margaret Roach is a joint production of awaytogarden.com and the smallest NPR station in the nation, Robin Hood Radio.